Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we will review linear equations. So an equation is just something that has an equal sign. We're going to solve each of these equations. What that means is we're going to find a value in each of these equations that we can substitute for x to make the equation true. So we're just looking at linear equations in this video. Linear just means the pronumeral, variable, or letter doesn't have any power attached to it. It's not like an x squared or an x cubed or anything like that. So the way that we solve linear equations is we undo what's been done to the variable, which is the letter, usually x, and we do this in the opposite order to BIDMAS. So it's kind of like in the morning, you put on your socks first and then your shoes. And when you get home in the afternoon, you need to take off your shoes first because they were the last thing that you put on. And that's the same when we're solving linear equations. If we look at this one, what we've done to our variable x, we've added 6 and then divided by 5. This is like putting on our socks and putting on our shoes. So because dividing by 5 is the last thing that was done to x, it's the first thing we must undo. So to undo dividing by 5, what we need to do is times this side of the equation by 5. But what you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other. We've got to keep the equations balanced. So if I multiply the left-hand side by 5, I must also multiply the right-hand side by 5. Because times 5 and divide 5, they undo each other. So what I'm left with, the next line is x plus 6 on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, I get 1 times 5, which equals 5. So this is basically saying, what number do I add to 6 to get 5? Well, if you don't know off the top of your head, that's all right. What we're going to do is undo adding 6, and the opposite of adding 6 is subtracting 6. What I do to one side, I must do to the other. So plus 6 minus 6 cancel each other out. I'm left with x equals 5 minus 6, which is negative 1. So negative 1 is the solution to this equation, because if I substitute x for negative 1, I get a true statement. If I take this equation, I'm going to rewrite it, but instead of writing an x, I'm going to write a negative 1. So x plus 6 over 5 equals 1. That is a true statement. Negative 1 plus 6 is 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. That's why this is the solution. All right, let's now look at this next example. It looks very similar to the first example. The only difference between these two equations is order of operations. Here I added 6 first, then divided by 5. In this second one, I divided by 5 first and then added 6. When we change the order of operations, we're going to get a totally different answer. So that's why it's really important when you're solving equations, you've got to undo things in the correct order. So in this one, because I divided by 5, then added 6, adding 6 is the last thing that I did. So it's the first thing I undo. I'm going to undo adding 6 by subtracting 6 from both sides, because adding 6 and subtracting 6 cancel each other out. So on the left-hand side, I've just left with my x over 5, x divided by 5. On the right-hand side, I've got 1 subtract 6, which is negative 5. So now I need to undo dividing by 5. This fraction line means divide. And the way I do that is by multiplying each side by 5. Because times 5 and divide 5 cancel each other out, and if I multiply one side of the equation by 5, I must also multiply the other side of the equation by 5. So I'm just going to be left with x is negative 5 times 5, and my final answer is negative 25. So you can see the answers here were totally different just by changing the order of operations. So once again, this is the solution. If I substitute x for negative 25, I get a true statement. Negative 25 divided by 5 is negative 5, plus 6 gives you 1. All right, let's look at this different equation here. I wanted to include this because people often struggle with this kind of question, and that's understanding the order of the operations. Because the 28's written first before the -5, people think, oh yeah, we must have done this first. No, BIDMAS tells us we actually did the multiplication first. X was multiplied not by 5, but by -5 first. See, this negative belongs to the 5. So what we've done here is multiplied x by -5. Now this 28 is positive, so we must have added 28. I understand why this is a bit confusing. What we've done to x is we've times by -5, then added 28 to get 43. So when we're solving, we have to do things in the opposite order. Because adding 28 is the last thing I did, the last thing I put on x, it's the first thing I need to take off. So the way you get rid of a 28 is you need to subtract it. I need to subtract 28 from both sides. Because plus 28 minus 28 cancel out. So what I'm left with is -5x. Now 43 minus 28 equals 15. So just note this minus didn't go anywhere. This negative is attached to the 5. It's got nothing to do with the 28. So it's not x times 5, it's x times -5 gives us 15. So the way I undo multiplying by -5 is to divide by -5, because divide -5 times -5 cancel each other out. What you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other. So my solution here is x equals 15 divide -5, which is -3. This is the solution because if you substitute it into this equation, you get a true statement. 28 minus 5 times -3, so 28 plus 15 equals 43. That's true. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.